In this tutorial, I'm going to be demonstrating all the steps necessary to create a continuous I-cord border that is knit on as you work. So there are other ways to create an I-cord border, mainly making the I-cord after the fact and then attaching it. But for the purpose of this video, I'm going to be demonstrating how to do several different types of provisional cast-ons. Judy's Improved Magic cast on, and then 2 different ways to do a crochet hook cast on. I'm going to demonstrate how to make the I-cord and then how to pick up stitches from the bottom edge of the I-cord so that you end up, when you do a provisional cast on, you have live stitches at either end. So you pick up the stitches along the I-cord to create your bottom row and then work your I-cord up the edges from either end. So I'll show how to pick up the stitches, and then I'm going to show how to pick up, specifically get the stitches back from the provisional cast on, how to get the stitches back if you used Judy's Improved Magic cast on, and how to get the stitches back if you did either one of the crochet cast ons. And then finally, I'm going to demonstrate how to do the I-cord bind off, which is what creates this top I-cord border and then joins the I-cord at the end so that when you're finished, you'll have a continuous border around your project that doesn't have a discernible beginning or end. You can't really tell where the stitches were joined to both start the border and to complete the border. So I'm going to show how to do all of those things in this video. There are in the video description, so if you go down below the video, look for the title of the video. Following the title will be a few words, and then in bold the word more, M-O-R-E, and if you click on that more, it'll open up a little bit more of the description. But if you click on the second bolded more, it will open the entire description, and included in that will be the entire list of timestamps. And next to the timestamp there will be I try to write a pretty thorough description of what is at that timestamp, so you can just jump to the parts of the video you want to watch or need to watch, and then you can just skip the parts that don't apply. So to begin, if you want to work along with me, I want you to go ahead and get your tools ready. So depending on what kind of needles you prefer, if you are doing Judy's Improved Magic cast on, you're either going to need a circular needle in the needle size that your pattern recommends, and you may want to have a longer cable, like a 32-inch setup. I'll explain more when I do Judy's Magic cast on about the cable length and why you may or may not want that. You can also use DPNs, double pointed needles, to do Judy's Improved Magic cast on. You're going to need at least 3. So you can use straight needles to do this. However, to do Judy's Improved Magic cast on with straight needles, you do need a third. So you need a total of 3 needles of the same size in order to do it. So if you only have straight needles, you only have a set of straight needles, you may need to do one of the crochet cast-ons, because you do need a third needle at the beginning after doing Judy's Improved Magic cast on. To do the crochet cast-ons, you don't necessarily have to have a crochet hook. I will show you how to do it without a crochet hook, but ideally a crochet hook in the same size as your needle, and then either a set of circular needles, a set of straight needles, or a set of double pointed needles is also needed for the crochet cast on. And then additionally, for the crochet cast on, you're going to need a piece of waste yarn, doesn't have to be very long, 10, 12 inches, something like that. You do want your waste yarn to be, it doesn't matter the size, but a little bit thicker, something that you can see very easily. You want it to be a smooth yarn that has a tight ply. You don't want any loose strands, and you don't want any fuzzies on it. It needs to be something very smooth that you can pick up through cleanly, because if you snag any of your waste yarn, you're going to have to cut the yarn apart to get back to your stitches. And then finally, it's optional, but something that I like to have when I make I-cord, either a tapestry needle with a little bit of waste yarn on it, or my personal preference, what I like to use is just a short circular cable that has a cable connector on one side. So, and I will explain more about that as we get to the provisional cast-ons. Okay, let's talk about I-cord. What is I-cord? How do we make it? What is it for? This is I-cord. All right, I-cord is just a tube of knit stitches that is usually created by knitting the same stitches over and over and over again. And by that I mean, so normally when you knit, let's say you have your stitches, and if you look at the I-cord, it looks like stockinette stitch, which is knit across, knit on the front. The side that is facing your eyes looks like knit columns all the way down. Okay, that's what stockinette is, in case you weren't aware. So when we make stockinette stitch, when we make it so it looks like knit stitches all the way down, we would knit. So on these stitches, we'd knit 1, 2, 3, and then we'd turn around, and on the back we would purl 3, 2, 1, like 3, 2, 1. Okay, and we just do that over and over. 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. When we do I-cord, we don't do anything we don't turn, and we don't knit across the back or purl across the back. We knit 1, 2, 3, and then we just slide those stitches across so that our working yarn is over here attached to number 3, but stitch number 1 is ready to be knit again. So we knit 1, 2, 3, pull the yarn across. 1, 2, 3, pull the yarn across. 1, 2, 3, pull the yarn across. And so what it does is it creates this tube of knit stitches that all the purls are on the inside, and it's just make this round, plump little cord of columns of knit stitches all the way down. Okay, so typically when you create I-cord, most commonly I-cord is 3 stitches wide, but you can make wider I-cord. So for instance, I have here, I'll put it up here next to my 3-stitch I-cord just for comparison. So this is a 4-stitch I-cord. Okay, so 3 stitches makes this round circular little cord. It's a very rounded cord. A 4-stitch I-cord actually makes kind of a boxy cord. It's more squared off. So the 4 stitches kind of end up making almost corners on the cord. So 4-stitch I-cord, and then you can even go bigger than that. So this is a 5-stitch I-cord. So the more stitches you have, the flatter the cord becomes. So it's not as round. Once you get to, like, you can kind of plump it up, but then it's just going to flatten back out. So if you look at my 5-stitch I-cord, obviously it's wider than my 4-stitch, and my 4-stitch is a little wider than my 3-stitch. But if I turn it on its side, it's almost the same exact width as my 4-stitch I-cord. It becomes very narrow. It's because it's been flattened out. Also, with once you get above 4 stitches, the column where you're pulling your yarn across each time, it does start to kind of gap open. And so once you get above 4 stitches, you got to really tug on your I-cord and kind of maybe even block it out just to get that to close up really well. But the more stitches you get, the more likely that column in the back is going to open up. So these are all created the same way. It's just the number of stitches that you're, so a 4-stitch I-cord, you just knit, and then pull the yarn across. Knit, pull the yarn across. 5-stitch I-cord, knit, pull the yarn across. Knit, pull the yarn across. Okay, so that's how typical I-cord is made. So when we apply I-cord to the edge of a project, basically you end up with a nice rolled, it's kind of a plump rolled edge. It looks very finished, and makes for a nice decorative border. So to work I-cord, you basically have your 3 stitches. Let's say I just knit these, so they would be at the end, the left end of my right needle. You can see that my working yarn is all the way on the left. The stitch that's all the way on the left is where my working yarn is. But instead of turning and doing something with that across the back, we actually can either, so if you were doing this on straight needles, you would have to slip each one of those stitches back to your left needle, and then you would pull the working yarn across the back and then just begin knitting again. So you would knit that stitch all the way on the right with, and then just knit across those 3 strands again. And that would form another row of that tube. So the reason I like to use double pointed needles for making I-cord, and I use short double pointed needles to do this. I actually have a longer set, but this I use exclusively my short set to make I-cord, because you can just slide the stitches across to the other end. You don't have to worry about when you're slipping the stitches, accidentally snagging something, accidentally dropping something, accidentally misorienting something. You can just slide your stitches to the other end and knit them again over and over and over again. And so it goes very quick if you have access to a double pointed needle set to make your I-cord. Okay, so that's basic I-cord. You're just knitting across the front, slipping the yarn across the back, and then knitting again. And it creates this nice round tube of a three columns of knit stitches to create that cord. Okay, so that is how I-cord is typically made. When we're working a project that has a I-cord border, where we cast on to make I-cord, and then we have we use a provisional cast on, so we end up with live stitches on either end of our cord. So basically I started here with live stitches on, let's see if I can kind of demonstrate this. So when I started I had live stitches over here and live stitches here, and then as I've knit more rows, my live stitches get further and further apart. So this will end up being where you put your bottom layer of stitches, and then you'll pick up stitches over here and have your stitches over here to start to turn your corner to make the sides of your project. So that is why we have to do a provisional cast on. A provisional cast on will put a live set of stitches facing opposite directions. So you'll have live stitches going this direction and live stitches going this direction, so that you have, I don't know if you can see that. So you basically have live stitches going in either direction. So you have live stitches going this direction and you have live stitches going this direction, so that it's all one continuous piece. We're going to start with Judy's Improved Magic Cast On. I specify that it's Judy's Improved Magic Cast On because it is different from the original Judy's Magic Cast On. So you can actually go and find on YouTube, there's the video that is, I think it's close to 15 years old now, from Judy Becker, who is, as far as we know, the creator of the original Judy's Magic Cast On. She has a video on YouTube showing how to make it. So we're doing the improved version, and the reason for that is the original version, when you cast on, you're going to have on two needles, whether it's both needles of a circular needle, whether it's two double pointed needles, or even onto your straight needles with a third needle to knit the stitches from the straight needles. However you do it, you end up with however many stitches you're casting on, the same number on both needles. So when you do Judy's original Magic Cast On, the stitches, when you turn and knit, you're going to knit from this needle first, but the stitches that end up on this needle ended up being mismounted, that is mounted backwards. So normally your stitch sits around the needle with the legs of your stitches should sit with the leg that's closer to you on the front of the needle and the leg that's further away from you around the back of the needle. But when you knit the original Judy's Magic Cast On, that ends up being backwards. And so the closer leg ends up being the back leg instead of the front leg. And so to knit the stitches that end up on your second needle, you essentially have to knit them all through the back loop, or reorient them before you knit them. And so we're going to do Judy's Improved Magic Cast On, which just casts them on slightly differently and allows both the stitches on both needles to be mounted correctly in the first place. So to do this, you're going to need two needles to start, and then you're going to need a third needle, or if you are working with circulars, you will not need the third needle. Okay, so you want both of your needles to be parallel to each other and facing to your left. And then your working yarn is going to be in your left hand, and you want the tail of the yarn coming over your index finger, and then the yarn going to the ball is going to be coming over your thumb, and then you can bring both of those strands down into your hand. So I like to bring the strand going over my index finger between my index and middle finger, and then just kind of grasp everything in my left hand with my ring finger and pinky. And that will set up what we call the slingshot position. So, you know, kind of looks like a slingshot where it's coming across here. You don't need a very long tail. I would say maybe 6 to 8 inches at the most. We're only casting on 3 stitches here, so it's not going to take up very much of that. So to begin, once you have your yarn in the correct orientation, you have your needles in the correct orientation, you can kind of stack your needles so one's above the other, or you can turn your needles sideways so one's further away and one's closer to you. We're going to call this needle that's up on the top or a little further away from you. So when you rotate your hand so they're flat, that's going to be your back needle, and this needle that's on the bottom is going to be your front needle. This position where I'm holding my needles here, where they're pointing to my left into my hand, and this yarn is coming across like this is going to be the start position. So you will return to the start position between each stitch. To begin, go ahead and bring the yarn between the needles, and then push the needles, rotate them so they're pointing down into your hand, and then rotate around towards you. So they're pointing towards your chest, and then up and back over to that start position, and that's going to put 1 stitch on your back needle. So this stitch is going to be somewhat twisted when we get to it. So I am going to refer back to this when you get to the part where we're putting the provisional stitches on the needle, way after we make all the I-cord and pick up stitches from the I-cord. So just remember this stitch, we're going to refer back to it. To put the next stitch on the needle, you're going to rotate both needles away from you and over the yarn that's going over your index finger. And then you're going to bring this needle, the one that's closer to you, you're going to scoop underneath that and let the yarn slide between the needles so it's coming over that front needle. All right, come back to the start position. Now you have 1 stitch on either needle. So from here, we're going to do a sequence where we put 1 stitch on either needle and kind of do that all in one motion or one sequence. So we are going to come back to the start position between putting the stitch on the back needle and putting the stitch on the front needle, but we're going to do the whole sequence. So the whole sequence starts here at the start position, and then you're going to rotate both needles towards you, bring over the yarn that's going over your thumb, and then let that yarn slide in between the needles, come slightly more to your right, and then rotate up and back around to the start, and then rotate away from you over the yarn that's going over your index finger, and bring that needle that's closer to you, let it scoop underneath that, and then come back to the start position. So you have 2 stitches on either needle. And we're just going to do that one more time. Rotate both needles towards you, over that yarn that's going across your thumb. Let that slide in between the needles, and then rotate slightly further to the right so it comes up over that back needle. And then come back around to the center and continue over the yarn that's going over your index finger. Bring the needles down and scoop under that with that front needle, and then come back to the start position. So now you have 3 stitches on both needles. And to finish this off, this is kind of unstable, all right? Nothing is securing these stitches right here. And so to finish this off, we're going to give both yarns, so just kind of twist your hand so that your thumb comes away from you and your index finger comes towards you. And then with the index finger on your right hand, just pinch that underneath the needles. So then you can let go with your left hand, and you got everything on your needles here. So now you have the stitches here. Now we need to be able to work them. So we're going to take everything underneath here, and we're just, anytime we move this, I'm going to just continue pinching underneath here so that the yarn that's unstable down there is not going to go anywhere, okay? So I'm going to turn both needles to my right, and I'm just going to kind of tug this tail down here because that's going to help hold the working yarn from going anywhere. All right, so everything should still feel pretty secure. So your tail is actually coming to this first stitch, and your working yarn is actually coming from this stitch on the bottom. But the stitches that we're going to work right now are on this top needle, the one that's further away from you. So from here, it depends on what kind of needles you're using to what kind of needles you put these stitches on, what you're going to do. So if you have circular needles, like I just put these on, you can pull this bottom needle out. So again, you want to hold everything on the back here, but you can pull the stitches on that bottom needle down onto the cable, and then just use this bottom needle to knit. So you can go into the stitches and knit that way. If you did this on straight needles or on double pointed needles, you are going to need a third needle. So I'm actually going to demonstrate that. You're going to need a third needle to knit these stitches. And we want to actually knit these twice before we kind of do anything with the stitches that are on this bottom needle. So if you are using circular needles, you can pull it down onto the cable and then just knit it twice with this bottom needle. And if you're using anything else, you're going to need a third needle to knit. So I will go ahead and pull this bottom needle further. I'm going to pull the stitches back on this bottom needle further just so that they don't go anywhere while I'm working these stitches on the top. All right, so I'm going to slide those pretty close to the end. I'm just going to stick my third needle in there, and then I'm going to knit each of those 3 stitches. So 1, 2, 3. All right, so now I have a row of I-cord in here, and then my live stitches here and here. Now I'm going to go ahead and slide these stitches that I just knit back to my left needle, and I'm going to knit them one more time. And that will just make everything nice and secure. Okay, so then I won't have to worry about the stitches being unstable or loosening or doing anything like that. And that will create my second row of I-cord. From here, you have a few choices. So if you have been working on circular needles, and let's say your stitches are down on the cable, if you're going to continue making I-cord, you may want to do something else with these stitches than to have them sit on the cable, because if they're sitting on the cable, then to make each row, you're going to have to slip each stitch, either one by one or as a set, back to your left needle and then knit the next row. So one of the problems with slipping your stitches back to the left needle every time you make the next row is, first of all, slipping your stitches back can loosen, especially the stitch that's going to be furthest to the left. It can loosen that strand. It can also loosen the strand all the way over to the right. The problem is if you tug on your left strand, it's not going to do anything to tighten the rightmost strand. So one of the other problems with slipping your stitches back to the left needle each time is that you can snag things as you're slipping them. And so just to eliminate that risk, what I like to do is move the stitches that I'm not working with to something else just to keep them out of the way so that I can either, so this won't work if you're on straights, but if you are on a circular needle or if you are using double pointed needles, you can do something else with your stitches. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to move these stitches that I'm not working right now on that bottom needle onto, and this is my short circular cable. It's an 8-inch cable that would make like a 16-inch setup. And I have an empty end and I have a cable connector in the other end. I'm just going to stick the empty end on the tip of my needle, and then I can just push through those stitches until they're all up on my cable. And then I can just secure the cable by connecting the other end to that cable connector. So now my stitches are secure. All right, so they're on something I can pick them up from easily. I don't have to worry about snagging them when I pick them back up because they're on a cable that I can just slide into a needle. And they're going to be pretty much out of my way to work. So if you are working on a circular needle, now instead of slipping your stitches back to the left needle each time, you can knit the stitches. And then you can just slide them to the other end of your needle so that the stitch that has the working yarn is, sorry, my cable wants to flop over here. The stitch that has the working yarn is all the way to the left, and you can just begin knitting again. So from here, you're going to understand why I like my short double pointed needles, because if I'm knitting on those, rather than traversing an entire cable each time, which can be a little floppy, can kind of get in the way, all I have to do is slide my stitches to the other end of the needle and then just knit again. And so it's very quick work to make I-cord if you have a set of double pointed needles to make it, because you can just knit the stitches, slide them, grab your other needle, knit the stitches, slide them, and continue on. Okay, so that is the provisional cast on. If you're using Judy's Improved Magic Cast On, that is how to do that provisional cast on. We will, if you did this, if you have your stitches like this, you can just continue making the I-cord as directed. So just you're going to knit 3 stitches and then either slip them back to the left needle and knit them again, or knit them and then slide them to the other end of your needle or your cable needle and knit them again. So once you have the number of rows of I-cord that you need, you can jump ahead to the part of the video that's about picking up stitches from your I-cord. If you are using a circular needle to do Judy's Magic Cast On and you're still kind of wondering, hey, you said you were going to mention something about circular needle size, this is the part where I'm doing that. Now that you have seen the cast on, and I wanted you to see the cast on first so that I could kind of explain the choices that you need to make, so I'm not trying to have to explain that twice. Okay, which size needle you choose is going to depend on your answer to 3 questions. So the first question is, once I cast on, am I continuing to use the circular needle to make the I-cord? The second question that you need to ask is, once I cast on, if I'm using the circular needle to make the I-cord, am I putting my spare stitches on another, on something else? Am I, the stitches that I'm not going to be knitting right away, am I going to put those on waste yarn or a spare cable or something like that so that they're out of the way? Or am I still going to need them down on my cable while I'm knitting? And the third question is, do I want to be able to slip my stitches? So 2 and 3 are kind of related. If you're moving your stitches that you're not working right away, if those are being moved to a different, to something else, they're being moved to waste yarn or to a spare cable, it's probably because you want to slide your stitches, across, as opposed to having to move them back to the left needle every time you want to knit them. So the answers to those questions will kind of determine your needle size. If you have a third needle to knit into initially, and you're going to be sliding your stitches across because you're going to move the on-hold stitches to something else, then you could totally work with a 16-inch, 18-inch setup, the shortest thing you can, because the least amount of distance to slide your stitches across is going to be helpful. You don't want to have to slide your stitches across a 40-inch cable. It's just going to be really tedious and annoying. If you are starting, though, with a short circular, you're going to need a third needle to knit the stitches on this. So when you have your stitches this way, to knit the stitches here twice so that they're all secure before you move the stitches off of this bottom needle, you're going to need another needle to do that, because you're not going to have room with a 16 or 18-inch setup to both pull stitches down onto the cable and knit the stitches that are on the other needle. Okay. So if you have a third needle to do that, then you can knit a couple rows with that third needle, move the stitches that are on hold onto something else, and then you'll just be able to slide your stitches across a very short distance. If you are leaving your on-hold stitches on the cable, you may want a longer circular. So you can do it on a 24-inch setup. 24, 26-inch, however long your needle tips are, is going to determine what your real setup length is. But you can do it on something like a 24-inch. It's just going to be tight because you're going to have stitches on the cable that are going to be very close to your needle initially. So as this comes out, it'll be easier. But when you're starting to knit, you're going to have to get your circulars in kind of a weird loopy situation, because you're going to have stitches on the cable that are going to be very close to your left needle, and you're going to have to still be able to manipulate your right needle, and you're not going to have a whole lot of cable to do that. Okay, so 24-inch I think works really well for kind of the middle of the road if you want to initially slide your stitches down onto the cable, so you don't need a third needle to knit these stitches, and then you're going to let them go because you're going to move those stitches off of your cable, and then you're just going to slide your stitches down. Then a 24-inch is not an excessive length to be able to do that. And you can just kind of determine, is it easier to just slip them back to the left needle, or do I want to slide them down the needle every single time? So if you're going to leave your on-hold stitches on the cable the whole time, you may want to go with something larger. This is a 32-inch setup because it does give you a lot more cable flexibility to knit the stitches on the left needle when you're going to have stitches that are down on the cable that are going to be close to your left needle for a while. So it's going to very gradually kind of come out to the point where, okay, now I have more flexibility with this cable. So just kind of keep those things in mind as you're choosing your cable length to do Judy's Magic Cast On. You may want something really longer if you're going to leave your stitches on the cable and just slip your stitches back to the left needle over and over again. And you might want something very short with a third needle if you're going to slip your stitches back and forth. And you may want to just kind of go with the 24-inch, 26-inch middle of the road setup if you want to do a hybrid version of that. So that was a kind of long and maybe not crucial explanation, but I did want you to have all those options available to you. To do a provisional cast on with a crochet chain, there are several options. If you do not have a crochet hook, you can still do a provisional cast on with a crochet chain. So grab your waste yarn. If you have a crochet hook, you can just jump ahead. But if you don't have a crochet hook, you can start with just a slip knot. If you've never made a slip knot, the easiest way I've found to make a slip knot is to take the tail of your yarn in your left hand and then wrap the yarn around your finger one more time, and then bring the strand that's connected to the tail over that loop and then over again, or bring the next loop over and then pick up your tail, and then you'll be able to just pull that tight. All right. So make a slip knot however you make your slip knot. And then if you don't have the crochet hook, what you can do is just kind of leave this open big enough so that you can just kind of grab not the tail but the other strand of yarn and pull it through that loop, and then you want to kind of tug that loop down so it's a little bit smaller. It doesn't have to be totally small, but then you can pull each loop as big as you need to just grab the yarn and pull it through there. You just want to pull each loop down as you do this. So grab a strand, pull it through, tug that down, grab a strand, pull it through, tug that down, grab a strand, pull it through, tug that down. So you're just making these little loops. Now they're not going to be really very neat or tidy, but it doesn't matter. We just need a small chain, and we need these bumps on the back of the chain to be able to pick up stitches from that. So as long as you can do that, it doesn't really matter if your loops are all the same size or anything like that. And you want to make at least double the number. So if you're picking up 3 stitches for your I-cord, you want to make at least 6 loops, but you can make 6, 8, 10, something like that. So once you've made a few chains, you can go ahead to where we pick up the stitches through the chain. Okay. You do want to, after you finish making the chain, you want to pull your tail through. And then from here, you're going to have a flat edge where the chains are kind of going into each other like this. You see like the legs of one stitch going into the legs of the next stitch, and so on and so forth. All right, so that should be a very flat side. And then if you turn that over, you're going to have a side that has little bumps going up the middle. All right, so the side that has the little bumps is the side that we're going to be picking up stitches into. So if you are doing this with your hand, you can just jump ahead to the part of the video where you're picking up stitches from the crochet bumps. Okay, for a provisional cast on with a crochet hook, you're going to need your crochet hook, you're going to need your waste yarn, and you are eventually going to need a needle. It can be a double pointed needle, it can be a circular needle, it can be a straight needle, whatever you have will work. So your waste yarn, again, you need smooth, tightly plied, no fuzzies, no strands that are loose waste yarn. And I do mark one end of my waste yarn. So this is going to be the end that's opposite my slip knot. So you don't have to use ink to mark your end. You can tie a little knot in it, whatever works for you. You just want to be sure that you know which end has the slip knot and which end does not. and that will help for later. So go ahead and put your slip knot on your crochet hook, however you make your slip knot. All right, put it on your crochet hook and then just snug it down a little bit. And then we only need 3 chains to work into, but I'm going to put about 10 on here. And that's because I don't want to work into the first chain. And I want to have several chains after I pick up stitches in the chain to continue on. So once you have 8, 10, something like that, go ahead and pull your tail through. You do not want to snug this down too much because we are going to have to pull that tail back out when we get to picking up those stitches. From there, you want to go ahead and grab whatever needle you're going to use for your stitches, and you want to grab the yarn that you're going to use to make your project. And go ahead and skip. So if you look at your crochet chain, let me start here. If you look at your crochet chain, you have a smooth side, and that's where the stitches are kind of coming like V's into each of the chains. So they're just kind of making a little circle, and then both of those legs are coming down into the next stitch all the way down. So this makes a nice flat side. That's the front of our chain. So you actually want to turn it to the back of the chain where you should see a row of bumps going up the center of the chain. All right, so these bumps are where we're going to be picking up stitches. So I'm going to skip this first one. I don't want to do it in the one that's closest to my tail. So I'm going to skip that first one, and I'm going to stick my needle point into the bump of the second bump. And I'm going to grab my working yarn, and I'm going to grab it so that the tail is coming to the left and the yarn going to my ball is going to the right. And I'm just going to loop that around my needle and then pull that through. And that's going to create my first stitch. And then from here, I'm going to pick up 3 more stitches in this chain. So I'm going to come to the next bump, put my needle through, yarn around, pull it through, needle tip into the next bump, yarn around, pull that through. And I want to make sure that each of my stitches is getting all the way up on the shaft of my needle so they're not too loose and not too tight. And then I'm going to pick up 1 more stitch. So yes, I will have a total of 4 stitches on my needle to do this. Yarn around, pull it through. Okay. So from here, depending on what type of needle you're using, you are going to need your tails at the right point of a needle. So if you're using a double pointed needle, you can just slide your stitches over. If you're using a circular needle, again, you can just slide your stitches down the cable so that your working yarn is on the leftmost stitch and your tail is coming from the rightmost stitch. If you are using single point needles, you are going to need to slip each of the stitches to your left needle. Very carefully. You don't want to snag anything here. It's really important that all of these stitches not only are going cleanly into the crochet chain, but also are cleanly on your needle. So that is how you are going to you're going to have live stitches here on your needle that you can work from. And then you're going to have live stitches in this chain that are going the opposite direction. Okay. So if you have your stitches on here, you can jump ahead to the part of the video of working into the crochet chain, because now I'm going to do the other version of a crochet chain cast on. To do a crochet cast on with the knitting needle, so this is kind of a modified provisional cast on, you are going to need your waste yarn, you're going to need your knitting needle, and you're going to need a crochet hook, and the crochet hook and the knitting needle should be about the same size. If you don't have the same size, I would go for a slightly smaller crochet hook than a slightly larger one. All right, so first things first, your waste yarn, you do need smooth waste yarn. It needs to be nicely tightly plied. It needs to be visible, so don't pick something that's really dark that's hard to see, okay? It just needs to be a fairly tightly plied strand of yarn. It doesn't have to be very long, 10, 12 inches, something like that. I mark the end that I'm not putting my slip knot in, and you can mark it by putting a knot in it. Just be aware that you're going to have to pull this end back out. And so anything that's really thick over here, you may have to undo to be able to get the strand back through after you've put your stitches in. Okay. So we're going to start with a slip knot in our waste yarn, however you make your slip knot. And you're going to put that slip knot on your crochet hook. Then with your crochet hook in your right hand and your knitting needle, whatever needle you need, it doesn't have to be a double pointed needle. It can be a straight needle. It can be a circular needle. You're going to put your knitting needle in your left hand, and you want your crochet hook to kind of cross over your knitting needle with the yarns coming under the crochet hook and then underneath the knitting needle. Okay. And you want to kind of make your crochet hook cross over at an angle, and then you're going to wrap your waste yarn over the crochet hook. So it's going to come from the top through the mouth of the crochet hook. And then you're just going to pull through that knot that's on your, or that loop that's on your hook. Then you want to bring the yarn between the needle and the hook and just do that again. So yarn over the crochet hook, pull through the loop, bring the yarn between the needle and the hook again to the back, yarn over, pull through, yarn between, and then I'm going to do this one more time. Yarn over, pull through. What that's going to do is it's going to put 4 loops on my knitting needle. Then from here, I'm just going to chain 4 or 5 more, and then I'm going to pull my end through. I'm going to pull my tail through. So I've got this extra chain over here. My tail has been pulled through. Do not pull this tight. You are going to have to pull that back out. And so you want to be able to access it. You don't want it to be so tight that you can't get back to it, because when we get to picking up those stitches, we're going to need to pull that back out. Okay, so don't make it too tight. Then from here, you're going to grab your other knitting needle. So depending on how your stitches, depending on what kind of needle you pick these up onto. If you have a double pointed needle or a cable needle, you can turn it, but basically you want the tail where your slip knot is to be at the right end of your left needle. Okay, so if you are using straight needle, you're going to need to slip the stitches across to a right needle and then turn it. Okay, because you want that tail to be at the left point, or the end closest to the tip of your left needle. So if you're using a double pointed needle or a circular needle, you can just slide the stitches to the other end and that will accomplish the same thing. So we're going to want the tail of our crochet chain and the tail of our working yarn to be in the same place. So we're going to start over here, picking up stitches from our loops on the needle. So I'm just going to knit all 4 of these stitches, starting with my working yarn. All right. So now I have, yes, 4 stitches that I did not, this is not on accident. I do have 4 stitches over here. If you are using straight needles, you're going to want to slip all 4 stitches back to your left needle. If you're using a cable needle or a double pointed needle, you can just slide them to the other end. But you do want both of your tails, again, to be at the very tip of your left needle. You want the tails of both your crochet chain and your working yarn to be on the far right. And you want your working yarn, the yarn that's going to your ball should be all the way to the left here. So at this point, you're going to be at this point, whether you did the crochet chain cast on and you picked up stitches from there, or if you did the crochet chain cast on with a knitting needle, either way, it should look like this. You should have your tail at the very tip or closest to the tip of your left needle. All right, the tail of both your working yarn and your waste yarn should be at this end. So I'm just going to continue on here with one of these and not both of these, since we're doing the same thing from this point out. So to work into this, we are going to take this first stitch and we're going to bring it off the needle, but we're not going to like pull it out of the chain. All right, so we want to keep this. And what I do is I just pull this loop a little bit bigger, and then I grab the chain tail and I just pull that through, and then I kind of tighten that around that. Okay, so there's a reason I'm doing this, right? Most of the videos you watch are not going to show you to do this. There's a reason I'm doing it. That is because we have 3 live stitches here on the needle. But if we look in the chain, if we have just these 3 stitches, so let's pretend like this stitch over here doesn't exist for a minute. We have in the chain this live stitch and this live stitch. And if you count, that's only 2 live stitches. But we need 3 live stitches in both directions. So I have added a 4th stitch over here so that I'm going to have a 3rd live stitch on this end to pick up. So I do want to point out that when we're doing any provisional cast on, we're not working when the stitches that we're working when we're making our I-cord are going this direction. All right, so we're working into our 3 stitches, knit, 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 knit. The stitches that we're picking up are the opposite of, so there's the negative of these stitches. And so when we look at the other end, the stitches that we have to pick up, they're actually going to be this, this, and this. So if we only cast on, if we only picked up 3 stitches from this chain, we would only end up with 2 live stitches going the other direction. So that's why I picked up a 4th stitch. I'm just going to have an extra, it's kind of connected to my tail here, but it's going to create that 3rd stitch that I need at the end of my chain, so that when I go to pick up stitches at the end of making my I-cord, I actually have enough stitches to pick up. Okay, so with the crochet chain cast on, once you've slipped that first stitch off and just kind of secured it around your crochet chain tail, you're just going to knit these 3 stitches to make your I-cord. So you're just going to knit them over and over and over again. You want to make sure you're knitting with your working yarn and not your tail. And your working yarn should be pulling across the back of all 3 stitches each time you knit them. So if you are working on circulars or double pointed needles, you can knit the 3 stitches and then slide them to the other end of your needle or cable and then knit them again. If you are working with straight needles, you are going to need to slip the stitches back to your left needle each time. So when you do this, I would recommend trying to slip them as undisturbed as possible, because if you stretch them out, let's say you stretch this stitch out, this 3rd stitch, you can pull on your tail to tighten, but it's only going to tighten these 2 stitches. It's not going to do anything with this. And so you will have to kind of use your needle to tighten up each stitch if you accidentally loosen them as you're moving them across. The other thing is you want to be really careful that you're not snagging a stitch as you're slipping it one way or the other. Okay, so you want to make nice clean stitches. It's going to make the neatest chain, the tidiest chain. All right, so you're just going to knit as many rows of I-cord as your pattern tells you to do. So from here, after you've knit the amount of I-cord that you need, you can just jump ahead to the next part of the video, which is going to be picking up your stitches from a provisional cast on. To pick up your stitches from your I-cord, once you've knit the number of rows of I-cord called for, there's something that I want to suggest before you start picking up your stitches. Actually, there's 2 suggestions I want to make. So the first suggestion has to do with how many rows of I-cord you're told to make. So if you look at your pattern, it may say something like knit however many rows of I-cord. Let's say it tells you to knit 90 rows of I-cord. And then you want to look at what it tells you to do when you're picking up stitches. So if it says pick up and knit 1 stitch in each I-cord row, something like that. Pick up and knit, pick up a stitch from every I-cord row. I'm going to suggest that first of all, you make 2 more rows. So 2 more rows of I-cord than you are told to make in the pattern. If it's telling you to pick up a stitch from every row of I-cord, unless you want a slightly odd looking border, I'm going to recommend you're knitting 2 more rows of I-cord, and what that's going to do is it's going to create a buffer space on either end of your I-cord so that your stitches can turn the corner with a square, so you can basically so you can get a square corner. So I'm gonna kind of give you a example of to show what I'm talking about here. I'm gonna give you 2 examples. So in this swatch, I have a total of 10 stitches that I picked up from my I-cord, but I have 12 rows of I-cord between this side and this side. So I have an extra row of I-cord here, and I have an extra row of I-cord here. And what that does is it allows me to pick up those 10 stitches across the I-cord and get this nice square corner here and here. Okay, so if I had 10 rows of I-cord and I picked up 10 stitches from that I-cord, what I'm going to end up with is this rounded corner. So I'm not going to be able to get a squared out corner because the stitches, this corner is going to end up so tight that the stitches are going to bunch together between the bottom row and the first row of knitting, and it's going to kind of pull this corner into a curve. Now, maybe you like curved corners. Maybe you like this kind of softened edge. The problem is when you do the I-cord bind off, there's no way to avoid getting a squared corner where you do the I-cord join. At the very end, when you join the live stitches here to the live stitches coming up this edge, you end up with an extra row. And so you do get a square corner here, but then you're going to have a soft corner here, a soft corner here, and a soft corner here. And so you're going to end up with 1 square and then 3 curves. So my recommendation is, if it is not telling you to skip the first row of I-cord and then pick up a stitch in all the other rows until you get to the end and then skip 1 more before you get to the provisional stitches, I would recommend going ahead and doing that. It's going to look neater at the end if you have an extra row between your picked up stitches on this end and your picked up stitches on this end before you get to the I-cord border. So just a suggestion, you don't have to follow it, totally up to you, just my recommendation. The next recommendation is not optional, it is mandatory, and that is you have to count your stitches very, very carefully before you start picking up stitches from your I-cord. Okay, trust me, you're gonna want to make sure you have the exact right amount. So to count your stitches, go ahead and turn. So once you've knit your last row, you're on your right needle. Your working yarn should be coming from the needle or from the stitch that's closest to the tip of your needle. You're just going to take your I-cord and you're going to turn your needle so that it's facing up. And what you want to look for is where this stitch that's going around the needle is coming down into the next stitch. That is your first row. And then you're just going to follow that down and find each subsequent row. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. You're going to count your rows. I would recommend, if you need to, place stitch markers. It can be really easy to, as you're counting along, you drop it or it slips and then you have to count over again. Okay, so you don't want to do that. You also don't want to lose your stitches off your needle, so be careful of that. But you want to make sure you have the exact right number of I-cord, and this is why. As you're picking up stitches from the I-cord, so you're picking up however many stitches across. Let's say you had to pick up 20 stitches, okay? So you get down here and you're picking up 15, 16, 17, 18. Ooh, well, now I'm already at the end. I need 2 more stitches picked up. Well, you can't knit 2 more rows of I-cord and pick up stitches from it because you're going to be going the opposite direction. You're going to have 2 stitches that are missing here. Same thing if you have too many stitches. If you're needing to pick up 20 stitches and you're going 17, 18, 19, 20, and then, oh, I've got 1, 2, 3 more rows of stitches before I even get to my I-cord, you're going to have a big gap here. So you need to make sure you have the exact right number of stitches, because if you don't, you're going to have to pull out every stitch you picked up and come back to your I-cord and either remove rows or add rows. So if you need to place a stitch marker every 10 stitches or every 10 rows, do it. If you need to do it every 25 or every 50, just whatever you need to do to ensure that you have the exact right number of rows of I-cord before you start to pick up stitches, do it. Not optional. All right, so when I make my I-cord or when I pick up my stitches, I like to, as I said, I work from a double pointed needle to make my I-cord. So I work my last row onto the needle that I'm going to be using to pick up my stitches. So in this case, my circular needle. So I'm just going to work this last row of I-cord onto my circular needle. And then, of course, I am going to count carefully and make sure I have the correct number of rows of I-cord before I start to pick up stitches. From here, I'm just going to start, after I've counted my rows, I'm going to start picking up stitches. And there's a couple of ways to do it. So you can pick up just through one leg of your stitch. You do want to make sure that you're coming, again, you're coming down from the stitch that's around your needle. You want to find where that stitch goes into the next, so where the legs of those stitch kind of disappear into the next stitch. That's your first stitch. This is the stitch I'm going to be skipping. And so I want to make sure that I'm going into this next stitch. So you can pick up your yarn through one leg. I don't like the way that looks. What it does is it pulls this leg into that stitch, and then it tightens down this leg. And I find that it just, you lose some of the roll of your I-cord when you do it that way. And so I like to pick up actually underneath both legs of the stitch. So I'll come, I'm skipping this row, and I want to kind of rotate my cord so I have the row of, or the column of stitches that I'm picking up from is kind of pinched between my thumb and finger. So I'm going to bring the tip of my needle under both legs of the row that I'm picking up a stitch from, and I'm going to wrap the stitch, or wrap the needle, and then I'm just going to pull that through. And so I'm just going to do this all the way down, and I want to make sure each time I'm picking up a stitch from the same column of stitches. So if you look at, where's my I-cord example again? It disappeared. All right, so if you look at I-cord, you have a column of stitches that belongs to itself. All right, so if I pick up stitches through that same column, then the other two columns are going to look really nice and neat when I'm done. So I'll show you, I'll pick up a few more stitches and show you what I'm talking about. But you're basically going to go under the legs of the next row each time, wrap your stitch, go into the legs, wrap the stitch, go into the legs, wrap the stitch. I'm not saying that you can't pick up from one leg. If you want to do that, it's totally up to you. I think it looks nicer if you pick up under both legs of each column, each row of that column, because you end up with a nice, neat edge. Okay. So then I've picked up a few more stitches. You can see very clearly here that my column of stitches underneath the knit column that runs underneath the row I'm picking up into, it's very nice and straight. My stitches are all coming down into the same exact place. All right, and then if I roll around to the back, I'm going to see the same thing on the back. All right, the next column of stitches is all very neat and tidy, with my stitches just kind of disappearing into the I-cord. So what that looks like once you've added a row of stitches or so, you get the rolled edge kind of coming straight up into the column of stitches, and it's actually going to kind of roll over the bottom of the stitches. And so it just looks like the stitches are just kind of emerging from the I-cord here. They're just kind of coming up out of the I-cord as if appearing from nowhere. All right, so the I-cord will just kind of roll up over the bottom of those stitches, and it should look very nice and straight. So if you are staying in the correct column, you should see your stitches kind of disappearing into the I-cord with a very straight row of, so the column of stitches next to the column that you're picking up through should just be hanging out right underneath, and you should be able to see the same thing on the back edge. All right, so if I make a mistake here, if I go into, let's say, instead of going under both legs of this stitch, I turn it slightly and I go under one leg from the column before and one leg from the current column and pull that through, and then I make it back to the correct row or the correct column. I'm going to create a little jog here that isn't going to look right. So I've got my nice neat column coming up here, and then this stitch right here isn't going into the correct space. So you just want to make sure that each time you're picking up your stitches from the next stitch in the same column that you've been working into. All right, so I want to find these, the legs of the stitch I just went under are going to kind of rotate over to the back, and so I should be able to see those going into the next stitch that I want to come underneath both legs of. Wrap my stitch and pull it through. So if start to pick up stitches from a different column, if you accidentally roll it towards you, and then you pick up in a different orientation than you've been picking up, it's not gonna look nearly as neat. It's gonna be kind of squiggly, and it's gonna pull your border. Your bottom border is gonna be, there's gonna be places where it kind of pulls up and places where it sags down. So you just want to make sure that you're going under the same column of stitches each time you pick up a stitch through your I-cord. Okay, so now that I've picked up stitches from all my rows of I-cord, most likely you're going to have a lot more rows than I have here. The first thing I'm going to demonstrate now is how to pick up the provisional stitches if you did Judy's Improved Magic Cast On. So you can see here I have my stitches on my short little cable here. And for me to get the stitches off of here, all I have to do is unscrew the cable, and I want the open end to be the end that's coming out of the stitches. So if I kind of pull those stitches straight, the open end should be kind of up to the top. And what I can do is I can just pop that end onto the tip of my needle and just slide those stitches back across. All right, and so now they're on my needle. Now, it will depend on your pattern whether you're supposed to knit these stitches after you pick them up and knit them, or whether you're supposed to pick them up with the yarn in front and slip them, and you're going to knit them on the other side. It's pattern dependent. So I will show you, if you jump ahead to the part of the video where I show you what the difference is between knitting these at the end and slipping these at the end and knitting them on the other side, you can look and see kind of the differences of what the pattern ends up when you do this. Okay, so I did mention when I was putting the stitches on that there is going to be a stitch that I was going to specifically refer to. The first stitch that I put on, the way that it twists around the needle creates this twist in the stitch. So if I'm looking at this, if I'm looking at the stitches as I'm sliding them, this stitch is just open to the next column. All right, this stitch, it's just open to the next column, but this stitch, when I slip it, you can see that it's twisted around. Okay, so it's not open to the column at all, it's actually twisted. So don't be alarmed when you get to that stitch and like, oh wait, that's all twisted up. What did I do wrong? You didn't do anything wrong. That's the way it's supposed to be. When you knit this, it will untwist half of that twist. All right, and then it will be open to the column. Now, one of the things that you need to be aware of is the stitches that we're picking up are actually the negative of the stitches that we've been working. So we've got the stitches going this way. We're actually picking up the negative. And what I mean by that is your knit stitches work like this. All right, so they kind of do this curve thing. The stitches that we've been working are these stitches up here. All right, so we've been working through these stitches and making columns of stitches from that. And now we're coming back, we picked up along one column, and now we're coming back, and when we pick up the stitches to go in the other direction, it's actually the negative of those. And so it's not like we have another stitch that's just going the other way. We're actually picking up the bottom of the middle between the stitches. This is our, let's see if I can get that. Put that back over here. All right, so we've got 1, 2, 3 here corresponds to this stitch, this is that stitch, and this is that stitch. But then when we look at these 3 tops, that's the 3 stitches over on this end. 1, 2, 3 over here. Okay, so they are, you're working into the negative. It's just because of the way the cord is connected, it's not going to be real obvious at the edge that you're kind of shifting from knitting in this direction to knitting in that direction. So you can see it if you look really closely. You can see that right here we go from knitting this stitch in this column in that direction to knitting from the negative of that in this direction. All right, so we kind of swirl it around and we hide it in this corner when we change directions. And it's just like this loop of yarn kind of pulls over another half a stitch to hide that turn where we're changing the direction of the knitting. Okay, I hope that made sense. But once you have gotten your 3 stitches on your needle, you're either going to knit them if it tells you to knit them, or you're going to bring the yarn to the front and slip them. And then when you turn to work across the back, you're going to knit those. I will warn you up front, if that's what your instructions say to do, if you're going to slip those stitches across the front and knit them on the back, your first couple of rows are going to look a little weird. All right, because you're going to have the yarn that's pulling across the front of the stitches toward the, so like when your stitches are sitting up here, you're going to have the yarn that where you slip those stitches across, you're going to have that yarn strand here as you work a few columns. So don't even pay attention to this edge until you've worked like 5 or 6 rows of knitting, and then you will start to see it will curl around just as the I-cord has been doing all the way since you started making it. It's just not going to hide it right away. So don't like freak out if you see that. Okay. So if you are slipping on the front and knitting on the back, where you knit on the front and slip on the back on the other end, it's just going to take a few rows for that to start to hide. Okay. So don't worry about that. If your pattern tells you to knit them across the front, you're going to end up with, a different looking corner. So again, you can jump ahead to the part of the video where I explain the difference between knitting these stitches on the front and knitting them on the back, if you want to understand why some designers choose one way and why some designers choose another way. From here, you can just start working your pattern however it tells you to work. This would be your row. You would move on to the row after picking up the stitches from the I-cord edge. All right, so that is how you pick up stitches if you worked the Judy's Improved Magic Cast On to begin. Okay, no matter how you did your crochet chain cast on, whether you just started by making a crochet chain with your hands, if you started making a crochet chain with just the crochet hook, or if you did the crochet chain that is worked around the needle, we're going to pick up the stitches from that crochet chain in the exact same way. So once you've got your stitches picked up from the I-cord edge and you're ready to get the stitches off of your crochet chain. So the first thing I want you to do is you should have the chain end going to your marked end should be kind of up. If you turn your needle facing up, that should go the same direction. And then your tails should be kind of coming down. So both your working yarn tail that you kind of wrapped around the crochet chain tail, that should both of those should be at the bottom of your chain. So it should kind of be going in this direction from your needle. Now, if you take your chain and you kind of turn it and spread it out here, what you're going to notice is there are multiple stitches. It's going to look like you have 2 stitches in kind of the same place. What is happening here is when we made this chain, we did pick up 3 stitches into our chain because we added that 4th one, but they have now rotated into that cluster that I-cord actually makes. So we have not 1, 2, 3. All right, we have the first, second, and third stitch are all kind of in a circle here. So you should be able to see, I hope you can see that. So we've got one stitch here, one stitch here, and one stitch here. All right, those are the 3 stitches we want to pick up, and we will deal with the tail when we get to it, okay? All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our chain here. So if you look at your chain, you find the flat side that has the V's, all right? Find those V's. You should have the tail, to the marked end is coming out of the top of that last one. If you turn that around, you're just going to kind of give the bump a tug. That's your tail. So you want to pull your tail out of that stitch. And from here, you should be able to just unzip your crochet chain. So I want you to unzip to the stitch before. So I just kind of like to pinch the chain until I get to the last stitch. All right. So now I'm going to get to my live stitches. And what I want to do is I want to actually get my needle into the stitches before I pull the chain out. So I'm just going to kind of stick my needle in here however I can get to a stitch. All right, so I've got 1, 2, and then I want this last one right here. So I'm just going to kind of provisionally put it on my needle. Now I'm going to rearrange these in a minute, but now I can start to pull my chain out from here. It's just going to loosen those stitches up. All right. When I get to the tail, when I start to feel resistance because I've got that tail tucked up in there, I'm just going to pull this part of the chain out of where I wrapped that tail around it. All right, so I can pull my tail here, and then I should just be able to pull that waste yarn out completely. All right, so from here, what I want to do is I want to check and make sure that the 3 stitches that I put on my right needle here are in the correct orientation. So I'm going to slip all 3 over to my left needle, and I can tell right away this second stitch is misoriented. So I'm going to so basically when I say misoriented, that means that the back leg of the stitch is coming around the needle first, and what I want is that front leg. So I'm just going to kind of go into it instead of going this way, like purlwise, I'm going to go into it knitwise so that it reorients that stitch. All right, so here's my tail coming to that last stitch. And then I've got one more stitch on here, and I want to also reorient that. Okay, so I should have my working yarn coming to this last stitch on my needle. That's where I picked up through the I-cord. And then I've got my 3 stitches that I just pulled off of my waste yarn that I can now do whatever my instructions tell me. So depending on the pattern that you're working, the instructions may say to knit these 3 stitches. So this would be a case where when you're working your I-cord, we started with 3 knit stitches. So we knit across these 3, then we picked up all these stitches, and then they want you to knit the last 3. Some instructions will tell you to, with your yarn in front, so bring your yarn to the front between the needles, slip those last 3 stitches to the needle, and then you're going to knit those when you work them across the back. So it just kind of depends on the pattern. I can show you, there is a difference, okay? So you can skip this if it doesn't matter to you. You can skip ahead to the bind off, the I-cord bind off. But so this is worked continuous I-cord with the stitches on both ends being knit on the front and slipped across the back. So I knit, start the row, knit across those 3 stitches, do whatever I'm supposed to do across the row, and then when I get the last 3 stitches, I would knit them. And then when excuse my strands of string here, my tails. So when I get to the back, I would slip the 3 stitches at the beginning, do whatever I need to do across the back, and then slip the 3 stitches at the end. So that does create a very nice continuous border where it's very tough to tell where the I-cord was picked up, where it was started and stopped. The downside of doing it this way is you get this really nice defined, so if you look at this edge is really, really well defined. The I-cord kind of almost tucks in at the edge on this side. But if you look at the I-cord on the left edge, it doesn't. It actually, the roll of this I-cord is toward the back. All right, so it wants to do more of a roll this way, and it's flatter on the back on the left side or the right side of the project. So you get a defined edge on the front over here, but you get a kind of flattened edge on the front on this side. Okay, so that's kind of the downside of knitting across on both edges, knitting on the front and slipping on the back. Okay, so your left edge is going to be flatter than your right edge. It's not going to be quite as it's not going to be quite as fluffy and rolled on the front. That roll is going to be on the back, whereas your top edge, your bottom edge, and your right edge are all going to have that roll. Okay. So this is a swatch that is, let's see, I'll turn it around so I can get with this is where it started. Okay. So this has more of the defined edge on both the left and the right edge. You can see it's still not quite as poofy as the left edge is a little bit looser or flatter than the right edge, but it does have that nice like where it looks like it's tucked into the stitches at the edge. And so it's a very clear border on both edges. The downside of, and so, sorry, I guess I should explain. This one is knit on the right side when you begin. So at the beginning of the front or the right side of the work, you knit the first 3 stitches and then you work the stitches all the way across. And then when you get to the last 3 stitches, you bring the yarn to the front and slip those. And then when you turn to the back, you knit across those stitches and then do whatever you need to do on the back. And then you slip the stitches at the end. So you're always knitting the first 3 stitches, slipping the last 3 stitches, whether you're on the front or the back of the work. So you do get more of this like clear edge where the I-cord kind of, I want to say tucks. It like creates a little like a little seam right here where the edge of the project kind of tucks underneath the I-cord. The downside is when you do, this is basically where you do the join. All right, so you've knit your I-cord across, you've picked up your stitches, and then you picked up your provisional stitches, and right here where you join the stitches and you bring the yarn around to start knitting this I-cord border, you get a little jog basically, because instead of knitting the stitches in the order that you have them around the corner, you're actually changing the direction of the stitches that are being knit. Okay, whereas on this side, when you're knitting all the way across, the knit stitches just round all the way around the corner. Same thing when you do the join at the top. When you get to the top edge and you join the stitches with a Kitchener stitch bind off, you're changing the order of basically where you're joining the stitches, and so you get a little jog again. Now this will block out, like 95% of this will disappear. So if you're like, oh, I don't like the way that corner looks. So first of all, remember that my little swatch is probably nowhere as big as your project, and this tiny little jog at the corner is going to be, it's going to be something that maybe you only see. Nobody else is going to see it, but also it can be almost entirely blocked to be invisible. So you can do things with blocking that make that little jog disappear. Okay. You cannot, however, block in such a way as to create this tuck at the edge. If you're knitting these stitches up, it's going to be very almost flat from your knitting into that left side if you're knitting these stitches at the left edge. I just wanted to cover that really quickly. Different designers will choose to do it different ways, and that's just kind of their prerogative. So all that said, let's finish up with how to do the I-cord bind off. Okay, so the I-cord bind off is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. I'm just going to do it on my little tiny swatch. It's still going to take me some time because I've got to bind off a total of 10 stitches here. So to do the I-cord bind off when it's time, you're going to go back to basically making I-cord again. So one modification I would suggest, if your pattern instructions don't tell you to work an extra row of the I-cord before you start actually binding stitches off, you might want to, again, just so that you get a nice tidy corner that's not too tight at the top. All right, so what I would do is I would knit the first 3 stitches, and then I would slip those back, and that's just going to create that extra height on my I-cord, so it gets a little bit of a boost to go around the corner as it starts to make this turn. So then to bind off, you're going to knit 2 stitches, and then you're going to knit the 3rd stitch of the I-cord together through the back loop with the next stitch on the left needle. And you're going to slip all 3 stitches back to your left needle, and you're going to do that again. Knit 2 stitches, and then knit the next stitch or the 3rd stitch of the I-cord together through the back loop with the next stitch on the left needle. Slip 3 back to the left needle, knit 2, and then knit the 3rd stitch together through the back loop with the next stitch. So you should have 2 stitches on the left needle, you're knitting those together through the back loop, and then moving 3 stitches back to your left needle. And you're just going to do this over and over again until you only have 3 stitches on each needle. And you can see it's creating the I-cord and binding off the stitches across the top of the work. All right, so when you have 3 stitches remaining on each needle, it's time to do a Kitchener stitch bind off. So I don't recommend adding a row of I-cord here because we're actually going to add a row with the Kitchener stitch itself. So you don't actually need an extra row of the I-cord to turn the corner, because the Kitchener stitch that we're going to do is going to create a row that will fill in this corner pretty nicely. Okay, so to do the Kitchener stitch bind off, you're going to want to cut a tail that, so really your tail needs to be about 5 times as long as those 3 stitches. So you can kind of guesswork it, or you can just cut a really long tail. Okay, the only thing you don't want to do is cut too short of tail. So grab 10 inches, don't be skimpy, and be nice and generous with that. And then you're going to thread the tail of your working yarn onto a tapestry needle. And then you're going to take so you have the stitches on your right needle. That's where you just finished working that last knit 2 and then knit 1 together with the other stitch through the back loop, or knit 2 together through the back loop. And then you have the 3 stitches that have been just hanging out here that are the end of this I-cord edge on the left of your project. So you're going to take your needles and you're going to turn them so that the basically wrong side of your work, it's going to be a little bit of the wrong side. The wrong sides are facing, so the right side of your work the right side of your I-cord here and the right side of your I-cord here should be on the outside. And then you want your working yarn coming from this needle, this stitch on the back needle. So you're going to have your front needle, you're going to have your back needle, you got 3 stitches on each one, and the yarn that's going to your tapestry needle is coming from the first stitch on that back needle. So we're going to do a setup. So to set up for the Kitchener stitch, you're going to go take your tapestry needle and go purlwise into that first stitch on the front needle, and then go knitwise into the front stitch on the back needle. And that just sets up to do the Kitchener stitch join. All right, so the Kitchener stitch join is a set of 4 moves. You're going to do 2 moves on the front needle and 2 moves on the back needle. So on the front needle, we're going to go into, and you kind of want these, you want your stitches to be pretty close to the tips of your needles, because at the beginning, so the first and third move are going to remove a stitch from each. So first move removes this stitch, third move removes this stitch, and then you're going to start all over again after doing the second. And so we're going to do first, second, third, fourth. All right. So to do the Kitchener stitch join, after you do those setup moves, you're going to go into the first stitch on the front needle as if to knit and bring it off the needle. And you can kind of pull your yarn through. You don't want to tug it tight, but you can pull it so that you're starting to feel the tension to the last stitch. Okay. And then go into the next stitch on the front needle as if to purl and leave it on. Then go into the first stitch on the back needle as if to purl and bring it off. And again, just kind of pull that yarn until you start to feel the tension. And then you're going to go into the next stitch on the back needle as if to knit and leave it on. All right, so we're going to do those 4 moves again. You do want to make sure that your yarn is not getting snagged around anything down here, that it's not accidentally coming and making an accidental yarn over either needle, and it's not getting trapped in any of the stitches here, okay? So those 4 moves again. By the time you have them learned, we'll be done with stitches to do them on. Go into the first stitch on the front needle as if to knit and bring it off the needle. Go into the next stitch on the front needle as if to purl and leave it on. Go into the first stitch on the back needle as if to purl and bring it off the needle. And go into the next stitch on the back needle as if to knit and leave it on. So now we've already set up those last 2 stitches, and all we have to do is get them off. So we're going to go into the first stitch. We're going to go into the stitch on the front needle as if to knit and bring it off, and go into the stitch on the back needle as if to purl and bring it off. Okay, so what this is going to do is it's going to create a row of knitting and bring all those stitches together. And really it's just about getting the tension right to get that, to create that corner with no gap. All right, so if you look at my piece from here, if you didn't know, you'd be hard pressed to figure out where the tail of my yarn was, because it looks like the edges just roll into each other all the way around. Okay, so you may need to do a little tightening or loosening. So loosening Kitchener stitch is a little bit difficult, because if, for instance, your stitch way over here is too tight, you've got to loosen all the way from the stitch over here, and you basically have your stitch that you made is actually connecting 2 stitches, so it's kind of a serpentine path where it's going down into one loop of a needle, or one loop of a stitch, and then coming up and going into a loop or a leg of 2 stitches on the top, and then coming back down and going through a leg of a stitch on the bottom. And so it's moving in this really serpentine path, and so you've got to loosen back up that path, which can be a little bit difficult to see once it's already done. So I would recommend just, if you pull the tension on your stitches to where you start to feel the tug on your needle, so you don't want it pulling anything, but when you start to feel the tug to where that yarn is starting to pull tight, that should be about the right amount of tension to get your Kitchener stitch join correct the first time without having to make any modifications. And then from there, you're just going to weave in your tails and you'll be done. So that is how to do the I-cord bind off. So I hope that's helpful. I hope that that shows you what you need to know to be able to do a continuous I-cord edge. And as usual, if you have any questions or there's something you want to see that I didn't show you, please leave me a comment. Let me know what you'd like to see. Let me know what I can do differently, and I'd be happy to try to do it for you. Thanks a lot. See you for the next one, and happy knitting. Okay, so as I've been working this, you may have been thinking, but my pattern, that's not how my pattern says you're supposed to work this continuous I-cord start, which is true. There are a lot of patterns out there that actually have you create the I-cord and the first row of knitting at the same time. So I wanted to address that really quickly. This is the way that I am showing in this video how to cast on. So you begin with your provisional cast on and you create your I-cord, and then you pick up stitches along the I-cord to basically create your first row of knitting. Okay, so you're going to get very even stitches all the way from the top to the bottom, or from the bottom to the top. And it's going to look like your I-cord or your body rows just kind of disappear down into your I-cord border. All right. So depending on the pattern, I have seen create the stitches at the same time you're creating the I-cord. I've seen that done a lot of different ways. So some patterns will have you do a backward loop cast on either before or after the first stitch as you're knitting those 3 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. They'll have you do a backward loops cast on either here or here. Some will have you do a yarn over either here or here. And then I have also seen some that have you do a knit front and back on this stitch. So you knit the stitch through the front loop and the back loop, knit these 2, and then you're only slipping 3 stitches back, or knitting 3 of those 4 stitches that you created. So every time you're creating a new stitch here, one of those is going over to become the body row, and then the other 2, or the other 3, are going to be your I-cord. Okay, so this is what you're going to get if you do that cast on. Now, it may not look terribly different. You can see, I promise, these are both the same size. I cast on the same number of stitches. I knitted the same number of rows with the same size needle. It's all the same thing, but you'll see that this looks bigger than this, especially when you look at this bottom row. So this row that my needle is going through. If you look really carefully at the stitches in this bottom row, they're significantly different in size from the stitches on the bottom row here. Okay, so this is going to become even more obvious when I show you the back of these. So here's the back of knitting the I-cord first and then picking up the stitches through the I-cord. All right, so that's what the back looks like when you do that. And if you create the I-cord and the first row at the same time, that's going to be what your back looks like. So you can see really obviously here that this first row, these are the stitches that you're making as you're creating the I-cord. You're going to have these really tall, kind of gappy stitches, and there's really no way to prevent this. It doesn't matter how tightly you knit. No, you can't really like make them with a smaller needle size, because then the width of your I-cord's not going to be correct going across the bottom row. So not only that, but if you do the I-cord cast on, if you start this way, there's really no way to end in a way that creates an edge that's the opposite. So you can see here where my bottom edge, where I picked up through the I-cord, I've got these stitches that are just kind of emerging from the I-cord. Same thing when I do my I-cord bind off, the stitches are just kind of disappearing into that top I-cord. It just kind of rolls right into that. So there's not going to be a way to do a bind off edge that has that big gappy set of stitches like you would end up here on the bottom if you add the stitches as you're making the I-cord. So I'm not saying don't do it that way, so please don't misunderstand me. I actually have a pattern that's written that does this way. It's a different kind of, it's a border for a shawl, so it's not as obvious that it has the gap at the edge, because that's the only edge that has the I-cord. Has a gap all the way around. It's like around the top of the shawl. So it doesn't really matter that the gap is there, because it's uniform all the way across the top of the shawl. But I have used that in a design before, and I'm not saying it's a bad design. I'm just saying you need to be aware of what it's going to look like when you're done before you decide which way to do it. So there is a way to, if your pattern is written to do this way, you can still extrapolate from that pattern how many stitches you, or how many rows of I-cord you need to make, and you can pick up stitches from the I-cord instead and just knit the I-cord the way that I'm demonstrating here in the video. So I just wanted to kind of bring that to your attention. I know that there are a lot of patterns that are written the other way to create the stitches as the first row of body stitches as you're making the I-cord border. So I didn't want you to think, well, I'm pretending like that doesn't exist. It does exist. I understand that. And as long as you're aware of the drawbacks of doing it this way, go ahead and do it if you like that. I will say the drawback of doing it this way is this takes longer. All right. So this can be done faster and somewhat easier. Picking up the stitches through the I-cord can not only be a little tedious and take a long time, but also if you miscount, you can have to redo it. Whereas all you have to do is make sure you're creating a stitch every time you do an I-cord row, and then make sure you count your stitches before you finish making I-cord. You can even see, like when you make your provisional cast on, your tail ends up at the other end when you make that I-cord as opposed to when you make this I-cord, just because of the way that you're picking up the stitches afterward. So just be aware there is a difference. It will look slightly different if you do it that way, and if you don't mind that, then do it whichever way you want. I'm not demonstrating that in this video. I think I do have another video where I do demonstrate that, but anyway, there are plenty of other videos out there if I don't have one, so you're welcome to go find another video that shows how to do that I-cord cast on. So I just wanted to make sure you were aware of it.